Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Nahmaduhu wa nusalli ala rasulihil kareem. We greet you on the 9th day of the blessed month of Ramadan with Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh and Ramadan Kareem. And excuse me, I have this cough and I don't know how long it's going to last, but bear with me. We have been giving these short talks in Ramadan for beginners, and we are concentrating on how to recite the Quran and how to study the Quran, and why should you study the Quran. And so now we've reached that position where we've reached methodology of the stars that Allah has spoken in Surah Al-Waqi'ah, that if you want to study the verses of the Quran, you need to study them the way you study the stars. And of course, when you want to study the stars, it's called astronomy, you have to study how the stars are connected with each other. Look for patterns in the stars. Similarly, you have to learn to see, to check, to discover how verses of the Quran are connected to each other, and look for patterns, what my teacher called the system of meaning in the Quran, and then that will help you to penetrate the Quran. So now, today we want to begin with a subject. Let us take a subject and let's see how do we study it in the Quran. And the subject I want to take is the crucifixion of Nabi Isa alayhi salam, Jesus. The question that arises is, was he crucified? Yes or no? And the Quran says, no, he was not. The question is, did he die? Did they kill him? Yes or no? And the Quran says no, unequivocally no. Well then, what happened? In order for us to explain and to study the verses of the Quran on the crucifixion, and they're very few, we need to do some homework. Excuse me. What is the definition of death in the Quran? The word, the terminology to which you must be introduced is maut. This is the Arabic word for death in the legal sense of the word. Many people die before they die. We're talking about death in the legal sense of the word, and that word is maut. And what is the definition of maut? The Quran gives a definition of maut, and it is in Surah Al-Zumar. I will not give you the number of the ayah, that's your homework. I gave you the name of the surah. And Allah speaks in Surah Al-Zumar to define what is death in Islam. And when we look at that verse of the Quran concerning the definition of death in Islam, we find that death is a process. Like divorce in Islam is a process. What is divorce in Islam? What's the process? The process is that you commence the process with a pronouncement of talaq or divorce. That's the commencement of the process, and Allah gives that right to the husband, not to the wife. He is the one who makes the pronouncement of divorce. If he refuses to do that, then she can go to the judge. So now then, the pronouncement of divorce is not a divorce, except for schoolboys. Except for schoolboys. When a pronouncement of divorce is made, a process commences. And the divorce is not completed, it does not take place until the process is completed. What is the process? That when the pronouncement is made, the wife must experience 3 menstrual periods, and after the third one, when she is now returned to a state of ritual purity, if there is no revocation of the pronouncement, then and only then does the divorce enter into force. It matters not how many times he makes the pronouncement of divorce during the period of the process. It's called iddah. He's only making a fool of himself if he repeats it several times. Only the first one is valid. Only the first one is valid. So this is a process of divorce. It begins with a pronouncement of talaq. It proceeds for a period of iddah of 3 menstrual periods, and then at the end of that, if there is no revocation of the pronouncement, only then does the divorce take place. Death is like that in the Quran, but of course the schoolboys don't study the Quran. Let us go to Surah Al-Zumar and hear what Allah has to say about the process of death. He says in Surah Al-Zumar, بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم الله يتوفى الأنفس حين موتها. He says that when the time of maut or death comes, at that time the process commences by Allah taking the soul. But sometimes Allah takes the soul and He keeps the soul. And at other times Allah, takes the soul and then returns the soul. And so the verse continues. وَالَّتِي لَمْ تَمُتْ It most certainly is not death. It does not qualify as death. لَمْ تَمُتْ فِي مَنَامِهَا, when Allah takes the soul, for example, in sleep. فَيُمْسِكُ الَّتِي قَضَى عَلَيْهَا الْمَوْتِ وَيُرْسِلُ الْأُخْرَى إِلَى أَجَلٍ مُسَمَّى. Because when He takes the soul, for example, at sleep time, He can either keep the soul or He can return the soul. And if He returns the soul, lam tamut, most certainly it does not qualify as death. And so the definition of death is that the process commences with the soul being taken. Allahu yatawaffa al-anfusa hina mawtiha. It begins with Allah taking the soul at the time of maut. And the process continues that Allah has a choice now of either keeping the soul or returning it. It is when He keeps the soul and He does not return it, only then the process ends. Only then. But if He decides to return the soul, the process does not end with maut. No, the person is still alive. I hope this is not too difficult for you to understand. And if you still don't understand, do please pray to Allah to give you some capacity to understand, because the subject is simple. And so death is not to be understood other than as a process. When Allah takes a soul, don't make a fool of yourself to come to the conclusion that is death, because you don't know the Quran. I'm sorry to use this harsh language for people who shout and scream where angels fear to tread. The Word of God. Be careful with the Word of God. Now then, having defined what is death, what is maut, only now are we prepared to go to the verses of the Quran pertaining to the crucifixion, which we'll do tomorrow, inshallah. Thank you. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.